Once again, hello, dear brothers and sisters. We are continuing our study about this topic of the war of Gog and Magog. And today I want to take you to Zechariah chapter 12, verses 1 through 8. A prophecy that, as far as my understanding goes, also talks about the war of Gog and Magog. I want to remind us that the war of Gog and Magog, the countries that are involved in us and attack us, they come from the north, that is Russia, from the east, Iran, from the south, Sudan, and from the west, Libya. By the way, Turkey, which I have not mentioned, is also joining this alliance. And it's interesting that Turkey is sending military power and aid to Libya to help in the civil war that is raging on there. They are helping the local regime. So we have these countries that surround us, these lands that surround us, and it's important as we now enter Zechariah chapter 12. I shall read verses 1 through 8. This is Zechariah chapter 12. The oracle of the word of God concerning Israel. Thus declares the Lord, who stretched the heavens and founded the earth and formed the spirit of man within him. Behold, I am about to make Jerusalem a cup of staggering to all the surrounding peoples. Surrounding, north, south, east, west. The siege of Jerusalem will also be against Judah. The cities of Judah will be besieged when Jerusalem will be attacked. On that day I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. So now it's all the peoples. It was the surrounding peoples, but now it's all the peoples. It's a different war. All who lift it will surely hurt themselves. So we have two wars here. The war with all the surrounding peoples and a war with all the peoples. I will not talk about the war with all the peoples because that is talked about in Zechariah chapter 14. That is the last war of the Antichrist. I will not talk about that today. I continue with the first war. From verse 4, we see how this evolves. Before I leave these verses 1, 2, and 3, we notice that Jerusalem is a problem for all the peoples. It's a heavy stone for all the peoples. The Iranians, for example, have committed themselves to freeing Jerusalem, as they say. Might this be the trigger that lead to the war, that the Iranians will drag Putin into this war? Maybe they will try to instigate a war effort to free Jerusalem. Time will tell. I don't like to speculate a whole lot, but time will tell. What is written in the Word of God, that will surely be fulfilled. Only time will tell how exactly this will happen. I continue to read from verse 4, Zechariah chapter 12. On that day, declares the Lord, I will strike every horse with panic, and its rider with madness. But for the sake of the house of Judah, I will keep my eyes open, when I strike every horse of the peoples with blindness. And the clans of Judah shall say to themselves, the inhabitants of Jerusalem have strength through the Lord of hosts their God. On that day I will make the clans of Judah like a blazing pot in the midst of the wood, like a flaming torch among themselves, and they shall devour to the right and to the left all the surrounding peoples, while Jerusalem shall again be inhabited in its place in Jerusalem. So I stop at verse 6, and we see that the situation is dire, it's critical. The clans of Judah, in the time of the Bible, clans were the heads of the tribes, but today clans is like a general in the army. And today it's a problem if a general says that he believes in God, because they have to pretend that we believe in our strength, we will protect ourselves, etc., etc. In the last war in Gaza, one general, he was religious, and he wrote a letter to his soldiers before they went into Gaza, and he said something that sounded a little bit religious, and he was frowned upon for that. So here the situation will be so critical, the power that will be against us, we will be outnumbered, 50 to 1. And that's why it will be clear also to the generals that we need a miracle here. We need supernatural intervention. Even those who do not believe in God will say this. And God says, I will give you supernatural power. I will put the clans of Judah like a blazing pot in the midst of the wood. And you will devour, you will burn the enemies that will come. And you will devour to the right and to the left all the surrounding peoples. So Jerusalem shall again be inhabited. So we have victory, and Jerusalem does not fall. God strengthens us. It says in verse 8, on that day the Lord will protect the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that the feeblest among them will be in that day like David. And the house of David will be like God, like the angel of the Lord going before them. God gives us supernatural power. The feeble amongst us will be like King David. He was a brave man. He was not scared to go and fight against Goliath. And he overcame him. He won. And afterwards he led the people of Israel time and time again to victory against the Philistines and other nations. So if the feeble amongst us will be like David, and the strong amongst us will be like the angel of God, which is tremendous power. So once again, God gives us victory, but this time we are fighting, and God gives us strength. I mention this because in chapter 14, there's a different war against the Antichrist, and there we say that Jerusalem will fall, and our power will be spent. We're not fighting anymore. We have been conquered, and their God is the one that fights. He comes down from heaven, and he fights and destroys the Antichrist. I will elaborate on that in some other opportunity. Another prophet that mentions this war of Gog and Magog is the prophet of Joel. The prophet Joel in chapter 2, verse 20, he says, I will remove the northerner far from you, and I will drive him into a parched and desolate land, his vanguard to the eastern sea, and his rear guard to the western sea. And his stench and foul smell from him shall rise, for he has done a great thing. The northerner, I'll remind you, Russia, the outermost part, that is the leading force that attacks us. The prophecy is giving here that this northerner I will remove far from you. I will drive him into a parched and desolate land. And he says something interesting. His face, his vanguard, will be to the eastern sea, and his rear to the western. Now, the western sea is the Mediterranean, but what is the eastern sea? It's to the east of Israel. So you have the Dead Sea that is called the Eastern Sea in some prophecies. But I want to bring up a speculation here, because the eastern nations are farther than the Dead Sea. Arabia. If you go from Israel farther east, you reach the Persian Gulf, and it's rich with oil, with gold, and money. Might it be that this ruler that comes from the north, maybe it's Putin, I don't know, maybe his thoughts of taking treasure is not only about Israel, a small country, but he also has plans to reach further eastwards, to go to the Persian Gulf and all the riches that are there, to all the Gulf nations. That is also a possibility. It is a clue, maybe. Joel chapter 2 verse 20. He might come with his ships. The ports of Putin that are in Crimea and Ukraine, there was a war there, and he took the ports over. It's a strategic place. From there, ships could go and get to Haifa and to Syria and to let the army out there. So on one hand, his rear is to the Mediterranean. That's where he comes from. But his face, the way in which he's advancing, is eastward. And on the way he tries to capture, but he does not succeed in conquering Israel. He will be destroyed over the cities of Israel, just like we will see. May the Lord bless you in this day and give you strength to march onward and be encouraged knowing that our Father in heaven is in control of the situation.